Hi everyone, welcome to the January 3rd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. Want to wish everybody out there a happy new year, happy birthday to all the horses. It's now 2020, a new racing season is upon us, so exciting things to come. We're going to look at some stakes races this week at Gulfstream Park and Santa Anita, some races for 3-year-olds on the dirt and the turf, fillies and colts. They're running the Sham out at Santa Anita, which is one of the first Derby preps that carries Derby points for those horses that are looking to make it into the Triple Crown races later in the year, and also the Mucho Macho Man at Gulfstream Park, which doesn't have Kentucky Derby qualifying points, but we might see some Derby contenders running in each of those races. Craig, how are you doing? And I want to say, before we get to the races that we're going to handicap this week, maybe we can take a quick look back at some of the races, the notable performances from the past couple of weeks, because I know we missed a couple of the TimeformUS Pacecast, so I wanted to get your take mostly on Omaha Beach. It was the big race that I think we missed and didn't get to sort of recap on the Pacecast last week.
I thought Omaha Beach was fine. My thing with him, I'm not sure who's going to show up in the Pegasus where he's pointed, but at this point in his career, as many races as he's won, he just hasn't run all that fast. So I'm really interested to see who he shows up again. I know people are going to tell me, some already have, that he could have run faster. I use the air quotes here, and while I'm not doubting that maybe he could have run a little bit faster, I'm usually one that doesn't like to buy that argument. When I want to take a short price, which I'm assuming he will be in the Pegasus, I want to see a horse that actually has run fast, and he just hasn't done it to this point. I'm curious what your take is on him as well.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I think it's kind of unfortunate that we're not going to see him more than one more time, because he's a horse that I think really did miss a lot of the big races. And I know some people are making the case for him for being champion 3-year-old because of his 3 Grade 1 victories. I mean, to me, Grade 1 races are not all created equal, and he did not win the important Grade 1 races that are those that make a champion. So to me, he wasn't really in the conversation for champion 3-year-old. And I think that's the sad part about it, because he might have been that good. I just think we're not going to know. I mean, hopefully he goes out on a high note in the Pegasus, but it's sounding like a lot of the top horses may not be pointing to that race now based on some of the changes that were made and some other options that are out there coming in the winter, especially overseas. So we'll see if we learn anything new about Omaha Beach in that race. As for the Malibu, I mean, he looked great. I thought his main rival, Complexity, just didn't show up with his top effort, so the race became a lot easier, and he did what he had to do to beat those horses. Could he have run a lot faster? I don't know, maybe. I don't really buy that stuff usually, but he certainly looked great doing it, and he's a horse that's probably going to be an appealing stallion prospect because he's got this stellar pedigree. Just what he could have done on the racetrack and how good he might have been against a horse like Maximum Security, we might just never know.
Yeah, I agree. The other horse I'd like to briefly talk about was Independence Hall, just because he was so flashy winning his Nashua, and while he did win the Jerome earlier this week, that one was hard to be impressed by too, especially from a visual standpoint. He seems to be a horse that has some problems with the gait. His speed figure regressed quite a bit on mine. I haven't seen what the buyer was, but I would imagine it regressed quite a bit on his as well from 120 down to a 102. So it's obviously early in the year. He's a talented horse, but I think you definitely want to see a little bit more out of him going forward.
Yeah, I think you and Beyer were actually right on par with each other here. I think there was an exact 20-point difference between the two numbers. I believe he gave him an 82. And to me, that's about right. I was more impressed before I saw the time of the last race on the card, which also went going a mile. And it seemed like the track did speed up later in the day. And I think that's the determination that you made as well. And the last race just wasn't really full of horses that have a lot of ability. I think they only went just over a second slower than Independence Hall. So that's not a great sign. I mean, to me, though, what I'm more concerned about are his antics prior to the race. He was, kicking in the paddock, was just very agitated. The fact that he broke over a length behind the field, just was not focused. Those are all things that you can get away with in a race like the Jerome when you're 1-9, but it's going to be difficult to get away with those things in the tougher Derby preps, or especially in the Kentucky Derby. So, I mean, I think this horse has a ton of ability, and I'm sure that those things that went wrong with him, most of them being his own doing, they cost him some points on the speed figure scales for sure. But how much, it remains to be seen. And can he get over those issues, I think, is the bigger question.
Yeah, it's definitely the question with him. He shied from the whip, I think, which was why Jose Ortiz was kind of really hanging with him down the lane, even though he was winning pretty easily, trying to teach him a lesson. But I just saw a lot of negatives for a horse with a big reputation.
I'm hopeful that he does well in the future, but I can't argue with anything that you just said. So I'm glad we got to briefly recap those two races, and we'll talk about the races this weekend on the upcoming TimeformUS Pacecast, which we will resume this upcoming Tuesday. But for now, let's get to the races this weekend that we're going to handicap, those being stakes from Gulfstream Park and Santa Anita. Let's begin down in Florida, and we could just go in chronological order with these, beginning with the 7th race, the Kitten's Joy, a Grade 3 event, going 7.5 furlongs on the turf for the 3-year-olds. And to me, the horse to beat in here is pretty clearly Irish Mias. I actually think the race he's coming out of the pulpit was a pretty strong race overall for a listed stakes. And I liked his performance finishing second that day. He finished up really well. He got a good trip, but I liked the way he finished off that race. There were some big gaps between the runners between first and fourth, and that's always a good sign with a race that gets a big speed figure. And to me, he was just the horse to beat.
Yeah, I would agree with that. No argument for me. I think he is the horse to beat here. I do want to note he did get some pretty nice setups the last couple of times for his style, but that's not unusual on turf, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets one again. The one horse I think that would scare me a little bit would be the horse just inside of him, Get Smoking, because he's a horse who's been in some races with some really fast paces. He likes to run up near the front, and I think he's going to be clear here, so he might be a little tough to run down. Irish Mias would be my top selection, but I do think Get Smoking's dangerous. Just to his outside, Irish Mias' outside is Yesterday Once More. That horse is 4-1 on the morning line. That's a horse I don't get at all. I know he hasn't run since October, but he hasn't run particularly fast even. He did win a stake back at Del Mar in early September, but he's just not one I like at all, so he'd be the horse I was against.
Yeah, she's actually a filly facing the boys in this spot, which is a little curious. I mean, I know Patrick Biancone has that other good 3-year-old turf horse, but he's not even running in the turf race. That's the counterpart to this. So, I mean, we'll see. So that horse, I agree. I don't think he was going to be 4-1, but we'll see how they bet the race. Get Smokin', I think, is also the other interesting horse in this race. I don't know what to make of that AWOD last time because he really did back up badly that day. The pace wasn't that fast. I mean, it was a fast pace, but it's not like it totally fell apart. So I would have liked to see him finish off a bit better that day, and Irish Mias finished well ahead of him on that occasion. But he does have a favorable pace setup here, and he did run legitimately fast 2 back at his maiden victory, so I'm not going to be shocked if he bounces back in this spot. But I was pretty much on the same page as you. I liked Irish Mias on top, and Get Smokin' would kind of be my backup, because the other horse that I was kind of against here that I think would be more in that 4-1 range is Summer to Remember on the outside. He was 1-2 when he broke his maiden for Todd Pletcher last time, but I didn't like the field he was beating, and if he takes money in this race, he's not one that I really wanted.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. One thing I did want to note here, the rail is listed. It's going to be at 12 feet. They do run on the 2, sometimes 3 different setups. I'm not sure. It came up on Twitter quite a bit this week. Gulfstream does publish at least a few days in advance where the rail is going to be for each race and which gap they're going to use, so you know how much run up there's going to be. So even for races like this that are at 7.5 furlongs, you can look, because sometimes the run up will be very short. Sometimes it'll be as much as a football field. So those are just things that for people who do their handicapping ahead of time, it's worth noting. And I don't remember the exact link, but it's pretty easy to find on Gulfstream's site.
No, that's good information because they don't really have an official inner and outer turf course there, but based on where the rails are placed, they can play very differently. So I do think it's worth paying attention to that stuff. Let's move on to a dirt race, the 8th race on that card at Gulfstream. It's the Glitter Woman for the 3-year-old fillies going 6.5 furlongs. And I found this race to be pretty difficult to make comparisons between the different runners because a lot of them are coming out of different races, a bunch coming out of maiden efforts. It seems like Jorge Abreu has a pretty strong hand in this race because he's got 2 strong contenders in the number 6 Spanish Point and the number 2 Lady Anna. I mean, if I had to rank them, I'd probably put those 2 on top in some order, maybe giving the slight preference to Lady Anna coming out of that maiden race. That's a victory that's worth watching, that 5th race on December 1st, because she looked like a winner maybe 4 furlongs from the wire, but Edgar Prado had her in behind horses, couldn't really extricate her from that position until very late in the stretch, and she only won by a neck, but it's one of those races where she probably would have won by a lot more if she had gotten out sooner.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I prefer Lady Anna to the other Brew entry Spanish Point. If there was one other one I like in here, it would be the number 8 Sound Machine. She didn't run particularly fast, but none of these fillies have run all that fast for a stakes race. These are still, in my mind, I'm still considering them 2-year-olds. I know they just turned 3 a couple days ago. I'll adjust to that over the next few weeks, I'm sure. But I did like the move Sound Machine made last time. She ran a good second in that listed House Party Stakes, I think it was. And she, she was the only one wide that did any real running that day. The winner, Spanish Point, who we've already talked about, saved ground most of the way. The third place finisher rode the rail from the back of the pack, never had to leave the rail. So Sound Machine's the other one that interests me.
Yeah, I've got no argument with her. I mean, Spanish Point probably is the horse to beat. It's just, as you were saying, none of these horses have run that fast, her included. And she did take a step forward against Stakes Company last time. But Jorge Abreu, if you know about his numbers or his statistics, first time out on the dirt with horses making their debuts, they're extremely strong. He wins at almost 50% with those types of horses. So I'm not sure how much we can expect these horses that won first time out for him to really improve. I'm hoping Lady Anna doesn't have to improve that much because I think her debut is better than it seems. But I'm not going to be surprised if she surpasses Spanish Point, we might just have seen the best of so far. So we'll see how this one plays out. But kind of like you, if I'm reading between the lines of what you're saying, I didn't have a strong opinion here, and I kind of like the favorites. Let's move on to, or stick with the 3-year-old fillies and move on to the Ginger Brew, this one on the turf, going 7.5 furlongs. And this race, I think, is a bit more competitive because I don't know about you, but I'm not that thrilled with the likely favorite in this race, Abscond. I know she's coming out of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies turf, and she ran fine there. She basically split the field after setting the pace. We'll see how strong that race ultimately turns out to be, but I didn't love her prior one in the Natalma, and people are going to see that she's a Grade 1 winner, and she's going to take a lot of money based on that, but I thought there were a lot of contenders in this race.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a big field of 12. The pace projector has it predicted to be a fast pace, which isn't unusual for a 12-horse field, but I can't really argue with it. There's plenty of early speed in here to go with Abscond. Not that she's a need-to-lead horse. She's run well rating just off the pace before, but she's certainly going to be a part of the pace, and I do think that could be a problem in here. Like you said, I think she'll probably be a bit overrated. People do tend to like those Breeders' Cup running lines no matter where the horses finish. And she was only beaten 4 lengths. So I like you, I looked elsewhere. And the horse I eventually landed on is She's My Type for Christophe Clement. I went back and watched a replay. I'm not thrilled that she draws the outside post in here, but with all the speed signed on, I think that Tyler Gaffalione can get some good position. And I really like the way she finished off that race. She finished strong, was able to get up and win. And it's come out to be a fairly good race. The runners-up has already come back to Breaker Maiden next time out. So I think she's a horse that could improve a lot over her debut.
Yeah, there were about 3 horses in this race that interested me, one of them being She's My Type. I won't elaborate on what you said because I think you covered the bases with her. Another horse that comes from off the pace that I would consider in this spot is the number 3, Moral Reasoning. She is a Chad Brown horse, and those types can often get overbet, especially coming off maiden wins, so we'll see how much money she takes. But I liked her maiden victory last time going the 6 furlongs at Aqueduct, and I think it's a bit better than the speed figure might indicate because the runner-up in that race, Stunting, really had no excuse to lose that race. She had a big lead coming to the mid-stretch, and that was a time when you couldn't really close outside of the Aqueduct turf course. And I thought Moral Reasoning, who was inside early, she swung out at about the 5/16 pole and was really making up good ground at the end of that race down the center of the turf course. So I think she deserves a bit of extra credit for that. First time out, she was second to Alms, who's obviously one of the top turf horses among the 3-year-old fillies in the country right now. So no disgrace losing to that horse. So I just think Moral Reasoning is one that could take a step forward. And another horse that I want to mention that's just a gigantic price and is probably pretty ridiculous is the number 8, High on Gin. This is just a really cool horse. If you go watch her races, she's won 3 out of 4 starts. All of them, she's been big prices. She's a real overachiever. She outruns expectations all the time. She was actually visually impressive when she won that happy ticket at Louisiana Downs 3-back. Wasn't beating much that day, but she overcame a wide trip to do it. She did not get the right trip in the Jessamine 2-back, so I'm not going to hold that race against her. She again surprised in a stakes race at Delta Downs last time in the slop. I mean, based on her pedigree, it doesn't really say turf, but I think she's actually run a bit better in her turf races. So I'm not going to be shocked if she outruns her odds here. Obviously, it's a tough field for a horse like this for low-profile connections, but if she's a really big price in this race, I wouldn't leave her out of the exotics.
No, I certainly can't knock that. And just to piggyback on you with moral reasoning, she was the other horse in here for me. I know she's stretching out, but being by Chad Brown, oftentimes you're a little leery of these sprinters stretching out, thinking that they'll show a lot more early speed. But I don't think that's the case with this one. I think she's going to settle mid-pack, make her run. My only thing on her is the 6-1 morning line. You're not going to get that with a Chad Brown runner in a stakes like this. So I didn't think the value was there, but I certainly won't be surprised if she wins.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really would shop for a price in this race. If the horse that you like, she's my type, is twice the price of moral reasoning, I think that's probably too big of a discrepancy. So I might gravitate more in that direction based on how the tote board, what the tote board is showing. Let's talk about the final race we're going to discuss from Gulfstream Park, that being the 10th race on their card, the Mucho Macho Man. This is a Kentucky Derby prep race. While not offering Derby qualifying points, I think we could see some horses moving on to races like the Holy Bull and the Fountain of Youth out of this race. And there are some runners that have some quality and have earned some respectable speed figures coming in here. I suppose the favorite might be the number 2 Chance It, who is coming off having won 3 out of his last 4 races, only losing by a head 2 back during that time frame. He can get the distance. He won going a mile and a 16th last time against Florida Breds. I think the question with Chance It is he's coming off a layoff. This is a horse that has definitely had some setbacks. I know he's missed a couple of races they were pointing for various reasons. So do you trust him coming off about the 3-month break here, or are you looking somewhere else?
I'm looking somewhere else. This is a race the pace projector sees with a lot of speed, and again, I can't disagree with it. Now, granted, these are likely race 3-year-olds, the newly turned 3-year-olds, so a lot of them are going to get that early rating where they're shown as speed or leader because that's how most horses break their maiden. But in here, I do think that's the case. So I gravitated towards a couple closers in South Bend and Sol Volante. South Bend's a little more obvious. He's not turning back a little bit from the Jockey Club Kentucky Jockey Club, where he was up closer to the pace than he likes to be. I think the 1-turn mile is more his thing. I am a little leery of the rail, so my top pick in here is going to be Sol Volante. I know he's trying turf for the first time, but I did look up his breeding, and he is a half to Explode, who probably most aren't familiar with, but he's a horse who had a really good season as a 3-year-old last year in Western Canada, won a grade 3, maybe even 2, ran some nice figures. And when you look up this horse's other siblings, none of the others have won, and they've run on nothing but turf or synthetic. So I think this horse can probably handle dirt, is going to get the right setup, and was really visually impressive in both of his wins.
Yeah, I have a similar outlook about the pace situation. I do think there's plenty of speed in this race, some sprinters stretching out that could really make the pace quick for a horse like Chance It, who I don't fully trust. I know he's a horse that looks a lot better on the buyers than the TimeformUS speed figures for a number of reasons. I kind of would go a little bit between those. I don't think he's got some big speed figure edge on this field, as the buyers would indicate. So he's one that I'm not afraid to take a big shot against. The horse that I would probably take on top, because I'm kind of deciding between 2 of them, would be Ashar for Kieran McLaughlin. This horse, I was really impressed by him in his debut at Belmont Park. Thought he beat a solid field that day. Based on pedigree, he's not really supposed to have a big problem with the 1-turn mile. I know that he didn't handle it last time in the Nashua, but that was a race where Independence Hall just ran off the screen. I know we were talking about Independence Hall disappointing a bit in the Jerome, but I don't think either of us dispute that Independence Hall ran a gigantic figure in one of the best 2-year-old performances that we've seen in recent years in the Nashua. So to me, it's not a big disgrace that Ashar lost that race by a large margin. I think he's going to benefit from that run and maybe do better in this race if they take him a little bit off the pace. So I'm hoping that he gets the right trip here, but I do think he's got more ability than what it seems. And the other horse that I would use is South Bend. For all the reasons you mentioned, he's going to get the right trip. Don't know how good he really is because he's not run that really fast speed figure yet, but I think he's got a little bit of upside, and I think Stanley Huff, his runners, always do well, so I'm not afraid to take a shot with him. I'd focus on those 2. As for Sol Volante, the horse you were mentioning, I do want to say, this horse is really, really good. I mean, if you watch his race in the pulpit last time, he just, the late kick that he put in makes him a really promising 3-year-old turf horse. And I think he's one that we're definitely going to see down the line in some of the top graded stakes races on the turf, maybe getting ahead of ourselves to talk about races like the Belmont Derby and stuff like that, or the big race on Derby Day. But I mean, this is a horse that is definitely that good based on his last race. As for the pedigree, I kind of feel like the horse that you're mentioning, Explode, is more the exception to the rule with this family because it's actually funny if you look at this horse's pedigree. He's a Flaxman's Holdings bred horse, and he's actually very closely inbred to Miesque, the two-time Breeders' Cup Mile winner. King Mamba was out of Miesque, and Caraconti, the sire, is a horse that Flaxman Holdings bred that's also out of the family of Miesque. So he's very closely inbred to that great mare. And if you look at the second generation of the family, I know the dam has produced that one good dirt horse, but this dam is a half to all turf horses. Her full sibling is Light Shift, who I believe was a winner of I want to say the Epsom Oaks, but some really good European turf horses in this family. I hope he handles the dirt because I'd love to see this horse do well. I just think it's more of a turf horse, but no doubt about it, he's a really, really nice runner.
Yeah, I can't blame him for taking a shot, and we'll see what comes of it. And of course, I mean, if this horse goes off 3-1, I don't want any parts of it. I like the 8-1, and I do want to say you make a really good point about the Independence Hall race. Just because he came back and didn't run as well next time out, I don't think you can use that at all against Ashar because he ran against the really good Independence Hall. So I have no problem with that selection whatsoever.
Let's stick with those Derby preps and move right on over to Santa Anita to discuss the Grade 3 Sham going that same 1 mile distance, this time around 2 turns at Santa Anita. Just a field of 6 in this race, but I think it's an interesting running of the Sham with maybe, I would say, 3 horses that are real contenders that one might think could move on to these other Derby preps later on in the year. 2 of those coming from the powerful stable of Bob Baffert. I see that the number 1 Authentic is listed as the morning line favorite, which surprised me a little bit. His debut was fine, going the 5.5 furlongs, but I think it's a big ask for a horse to go from a 5.5 furlong debut in out to a two-turn mile in his stakes debut next time out. So I don't know. I just wasn't sure this horse would be quite up to the task.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have, same as you, the top 2 choices are trained by Bob Baffert, but I don't think either one of them looks like a standout to me. They haven't run particularly fast. I didn't like the stretch out you mentioned on Authentic. So of the 2, I definitely prefer Azul Coast, who has already won at a mile. As opposed to stretching out the 2.5 furlongs, he ran a little bit faster. But for my top selection, I actually went to the outside for the horse that just broke his maiden, Tyson. I was really impressed by that effort. He beat a heavy favorite that day. He did it easily. I liked how he was able to stalk the pace. He wasn't overly headstrong, and he just ran faster than the others in here. And I think he's going to be probably the 3rd longest price of the 3 logical contenders. And I think he's the most likely winner. So that pretty much sums it up for me.
When you find a situation like that, that's usually a time you want to bet. I can't really argue with your assessment of how they're going to bet the race because I do think this horse is going to be the biggest price of those 3. And I liked his maiden win last time. I thought he was really game and gritty to get the job done that day. Looked like the winner might be the second place finisher might be spurting away at the top of the stretch, but this horse just clung to him and got by him late. So I think he's definitely a major contender in this spot. For me, it was splitting hairs, but I put Azul Coast on top. I liked his debut at Los Alamitos. It was over a good sealed track, so he's got to handle a dry strip on Saturday, but it's worth watching this horse's race because he was extremely wide around both turns that day, especially around the far turn where he was legitimately 5 to 6 wide for the entire run around that bend. And it's really hard for horses to overcome that kind of trip and still win and win going away like he did. I don't think there was a whole lot behind him in that race, but he did things the right way. And I think the speed figure of ground losses taken into account would have been higher. So I definitely prefer him to his Bob Baffert trained stablemate Authentic. And I give him the slight edge over Tyshawn.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. My one concern about Azul Coast is that the race was at Los Al. It's just a tricky track. I mean, it could turn out he's even better than he showed that day. It's just a really tricky track to get a read on, and with that being his only start, I can't have complete confidence in him, especially with it being a sealed track, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the ground loss, I also think, I'm not sure how much that matters at Los Alamitos, given the configuration of that track. It's a little weird, and sometimes things aren't always as they might appear, even on replay. But I do think this horse has a bit of ability. So we'll see. He's got to step up to beat this field. Let's move on to the turf and talk about the Grade 2 San Gabriel, which is run a little bit later on Santa Anita's Saturday card. This is one that does not have a whole lot of pace. I know the pace projector is not really characterizing this as favoring any specific type of running style, but when I go through this field, there's not really a confirmed front runner. I mean, I know North County Guy had the lead going 1 3/8 last time, but he's not really usually a speed horse. And I think the lead is going to be there for the taking, and how the trips play out could have a big impact on this race. The horse to beat, though, I think, is Cleopatra Strike. And he's a horse we've talked about in the past. He's just a pretty solid type of runner that always shows up. I don't have a big problem with him turning back to a mile and an eighth. I just think he's the horse to beat.
Yeah, I think he's a horse to beat as well. For the record, this is a grade 2 in name only. I don't really think this is a particularly strong grade 2 race. I do think Cleopatra Strike is a logical favorite. I don't really have any knocks against him, but I also don't think he's a standout. I think you could make a case for some others in here, but that said, I had trouble making a strong case as far as betting anybody else in here. Everybody seems to have some negatives. There's some distance changes. The second choice, I think, is Desert Stone on the morning line. He's coming off a long layoff. He hasn't run this far in a while. We have North County Guy from Richard Baltus, who's turning back in distance. And like I said, I couldn't argue against any of them, but I can't get excited to bet any of them either.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at the others in this race. I ultimately decided to just leave Cleopatra Strike on top. I'm not picking against him. If he's less than 2-1, that's probably not a great price on a horse who's 4 for 26 lifetime with 9 seconds. But he has run his best races at Santa Anita, and I know that they ran him a mile and a half last time in that Hollywood Turf Cup. I don't think he really wants to go that far. I think he's much better going this mile and an eighth distance, and he's just been facing better horses and is in good form. So I'm definitely not against him in any way. If I had to choose some other horses to use, I mean, Desert Stone, who you were mentioning, I guess he's got that class edge, but the layoff and him always breaking slowly, I don't like that. If I had to choose another horse to use, it would be the number 4 Overdue, who I know he lost by 11 lengths in the Hollywood Turf Cup last time, but a mile and a half doesn't have to be the right distance for him. I mean, this is a horse, after all, that broke his maiden going 5 furlongs on the turf, so it's probably not likely that a mile and a half is the right distance for him. And going back to his prior allowance win, I thought he looked good that day and ran a respectable speed figure. Also, last time out, that race is not as bad as it seems, because I thought Mike Smith maybe moved a little prematurely on him and was just wide without cover for almost the entire race, and typically that's not going to lead to a top effort by a horse when you get that kind of trip. So he's one that I would use defensively in here underneath, but I think he's going to have to improve to beat Cleopatra Strike.
Yeah, well, you don't have to twist my arm to do Phil D'Amato at a price. I'm a fan of that guy, particularly on turf. So fun race to watch, but I'll probably be on the sidelines.
And we'll close things out with a race on Sunday, the only Sunday race we're going to talk about on this podcast, that being the Santa Ynez, also at Santa Anita, grade 2 event for the 3-year-old fillies going 7 furlongs. And it's really more like the Bob Baffert Stakes, because Bob Baffert has 3 horses in this field, and they're probably going to be the top 3 choices by quite a ways in the wagering. Bast, she's the one to beat. She's a 3-time grade 1 winner. That sounds impressive, although she did lose the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, her biggest test last year. She did win 3 other grade 1 races during that time. Never really earned a speed figure that says that she's going to be a top 3-year-old filly. She's got to improve further, but she does have the class edge on this field.
She does, but as you say, Bob Baffert has 3 horses in here, 3 fillies, and they're probably the best 3. And I'm going to make the argument that Bass may very well be the least talented of the 3. So at a short price, I'm going to try to beat her. It would seem the logical choice would be Auberge, who just romped the first time out with a 112 TimeformUS speed figure, which towers over the field. But I am a little bit leery of that inside draw at 7 furlongs. It's not an ideal post at Santa Anita. So I think I'm going to take a shot with Golden Principle if the morning line holds. I was impressed by her debut. It's been a pretty strong race coming out. A couple of winners have already come out of that race, where I can't say the same for Auberge. Her race has not looked as strong, which, makes me want to, I'm keeping an eye on that speed figure, because so far horses haven't run back to it. So of the 3, Golden Principle is the one I like the most when you consider value.
We are on the exact same page here. I was going to make the same points you made about the Auberge speed figure. I mean, obviously you're already aware of that, but that race, I do want to see it be validated, because the other horses have not run back to it yet. And also, I just liked Golden Principle's race better from a visual standpoint because Auberge got a good trip, stalking outside, really never had to face any adversity. I thought that Drayden Van Dyke got really aggressive early in the race with Golden Principle in her debut. It was a fast pace, and he really sent her after the leader around the far turn and opened up probably earlier than he needed to and made her a little vulnerable to a horse that was closing late, that Classy Ruler, who is one I think to follow when she runs back because she ran really well to be second that day. And I just thought Golden Principle held on really well that day. I know it was just 6 furlongs, and she's got to stretch out to the 7 here, but I liked what I saw from her. I think she's trading well out of that race, so I like her best of the 3 Bob Baffert horses, and like you were saying, maybe she's going to be the best price.
Yeah, and this is a race where if Bass can't really get the set, I mean, she should get a perfect setup is what I meant to say. And if she can't get the job done or narrowly gets the job done, she's the kind of horse I'm probably gonna latch on to and be against for a while because she seems like she's always going to get bet. She's been bet since her debut. She always takes money. And like you said, she just hasn't run very fast yet. So until that changes, I'll probably continue to bet against her.
Yeah, it's something that I think we're going to talk about a lot more on the TimeformUS Pacecast in the coming weeks as I start to run these prep races. The 2-year-old fillies, I mean, I know I voted for British Idiom as the champion, and she makes sense because she won the Breeders' Cup, but even her and the others that are out there, they just haven't really earned speed figures that make them as fast as the best colts out there or the best fillies that we've seen in this division in past years. So I think a lot of them really do have to improve, and if some new faces are already running fast speed figures, I would give them the edge, and we'll see how that plays out in these upcoming prep races, including in this Santa Ynez on Sunday. So those are all the races for this week. Craig, great to talk about these races with you. Obviously, we'll be back on Tuesday now that we're in the new year. I'll be back on a normal schedule of Tuesday and Friday, TimeformUS Pacecast and TimeformUS Forecast. So look for that in a few days. As always, you can listen to us on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form and check us out. Thanks for listening this week, guys, and we'll see you again on Tuesday.